Ivy Zelman, welcome to the Brothers on Books podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure to be on with you.
So when we were going through the outline, we figured the Rolling Stones had a big influence in the title of this book. We were curious what your top 3 Rolling Stones songs of all time were, and then maybe you could sprinkle in some stories of when you snuck into those concerts that you were talking about in the book.
Well, interestingly, I got into the Stones really late 20s, early 30s. I was more a heavy metal, kind of really into Judas Priest and Metallica growing up, and Led Zeppelin, big Zeppelin fan. But I just fell in love with the Stones and saw them in my late 20s in Philly. And I remember they were playing in the rain, and I just was 100% soaked and never thought once of it, and dancing to every song. I was just talking about a favorite song, Mother's Little Helper, which if you are not familiar, I just, I love Angie, even though it's not one that's a lot of times featured. And of course, Gimme Shelter. So, having my top, but there's a lot more. And I always hear songs that, will make me think of different times in my life, but I have seen them quite a few times, and I'm going to get to see them on the last night of their tour with my middle child, my son, Zach, in Stockholm on July 31st. So I'm pretty pumped.
Very cool.
That's interesting. So you were a metal fan.
It's a bit of rocker, metal, and really more as a teenager, and that kind of, shifts. In fact, my sister, who I think they wanted to go see Aerosmith in Las Vegas, and I love Aerosmith, but I don't really, I'm not interested in going to see them in a big trip. If they're in New York, I'd go see them. So now that I'm older, I'm kind of more into, I don't know, R&B and top hits. So I'm not going to Metallica shows now. It changes.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, I like Metallica. Iron Maiden is actually one of my favorite bands.
Oh, really?
And when I say that, I tend to get a lot of sort of odd looks. I was wondering
I've seen Iron Maiden. I'm with you. I've named bands, and people are like, "What? You were into Ozzy and Black Sabbath?" And I'm like, I guess as a kid, that was what we were, into. Teenager. Which you look, Alex, like a teenager to me, but
I'm in my early 30s. So
there you go.
Well, I think that's good. I think it's good to still look.
That's a good thing. To look young is great. You too, Jack. Both of you look very young.
So I guess just for my first question, when I was reading your book, I was curious, do you know who Malcolm Gladwell is by chance?
No, I don't.
Okay, so he writes a lot of sort of social psychology books, and one of his books was this book called Talking to Strangers. And he sort of relays the importance of being able to just communicate and build relationships with just a ton of people. And one of the things that really stuck out to me is it seemed like you had an incredible ability to build very deep connections with just obviously your coworkers, but even at some point you were talking about having strong connections with like your hairstylist and your manicurist. Can you maybe go into some of the benefits you feel like you've gained from having a skill set like that, and maybe how you could work on developing a large network, and maybe just how to build relationships almost?
I think it really stems, and I appreciate that. I am proud of, that part of my personality or my attributes that, I think have really benefited me. That is not being afraid to ask for help and just asking a lot of questions. Sometimes, annoyingly so, where I would get teachers that either loved me or hated me. And I think that I've always been very inquisitive. But as I got older and I started appreciating the benefits of asking people questions, like I did information interviews when I was still going to night school and working full time at Arthur Young. And it really started at Arthur Young and asking, at the time, the professional accountants that I interacted with, do you like what you're doing? Is it, is it fulfilling all of what you thought it would provide you? And they're like, not really. And like, I'm like, oh, kind of taken back, but I started really digging in and asking people about their careers and to tell me their story. And I think people that are shy and a little bit more introverted, if you get people chatting about themselves, you might have like 5% of an hour conversation and they hang up and they're like, oh my God, she's amazing. And, wow, that woman's going places. And I said, I was literally 5% of the conversation, but a lot of questions. And I think that even when I'm at a doctor's office or I'm getting served by a waitress, my first question to every server is, what's your name? And nice to meet you. Hope you're having a great day. And try to warm up, and eye contact's critical, but it's about making them feel that we're all on an equal playing field, irrespective of their profession or lack of profession or whatever, just being with people. And I think that comes really from probably my roots of working hard and being sort of on my own at an early age at 18 and having to fend for myself and not being afraid to ask for help. But I think it was my personality even as a young kid. So I think it's a bit who I am, but I've really massaged and matured the benefits of taking what might have been, the kid that was, annoying to teachers and a pain in the ass and asked too many questions or had a big mouth and would get in trouble, to, a little bit more poised and professional. And hopefully, I wasn't always mature in some of my questions to management teams back in my earlier part of my career on public conference calls that I, now don't call managements out in public. But so I wasn't always necessarily as mature as I am now. I probably realize in hindsight, I don't have to make someone feel uncomfortable, even though I might be right. And I'm like getting them, that was sort of like more of the, teenager in me that I've hopefully mitigated. I don't know if that answers your question, but it's really about asking questions. It's about making people feel comfortable, whether it's Anna, who's doing my nails, talking about her son, talking about, that what she enjoys about her work, or being with my masseuse, who, is a lovely man, and just taking the time to actually ask people about themselves, I think is really an easy way to break the ice and really get a conversation going, and following up with people. It's an email right after you go on an information interview to thank that person for their time and be thoughtful and considerate that, they provided you information and you need to show them respect and quickly, email them with appreciation, and that stands out. Or following up, in a few weeks and, maybe sending them something that you did, and you have to continue. It's really work. It's work. And having, grown up with, today I'm 56 years old, and my closest friends in the world I met when I was in 7th and 8th grade, and one of which is coming to visit me tomorrow from Salt Lake, Lisa. And my kids are in awe of like how I sustain these friendships. And I said, it takes work. You have to, reach out and connect, and it's not going to just happen. And it takes a lot of effort. So I think that's really a long-winded answer, but that's how I roll.
Cool. I guess transitioning to more of your professional path, if you could talk about valuing those asbestos liabilities in the late 90s, when you thought these companies might go under, maybe talk a little. I hadn't heard you speak on that before. And then when Warren Buffett took the 15% stake in USG, if you could talk through what that was like.
Well, at the time I was at Credit Suisse in the late 90s. I started my career at Salomon Brothers, and then went to Credit Suisse after 8 years there, and I was there for a decade. But in the earlier part of my my career at Credit Suisse, I was very focused on the companies that were exposed to asbestos, because cases were coming in each quarter. The caseload would be rising, and very concerned that the liabilities were going to continue to mount, and would ask questions on conference calls. And the managements really wanted to talk about the current fundamentals and not really get into the cases. But as the, cases were mounting, there was more focus on it. So we were always digging to find industry executives that can help us better understand from their perspective, was the asbestos liability and the risk of, future liability, was it really concerning? And so I got a lucky break, to be honest with you, and I've had luck in my life, but the CFO of Owens Corning, head of legal for Owens Corning, decided that she wanted to take me to dinner with a gentleman who's called the Special Master. And this firm, Ken Feinberg's group, had really been the special masters on, the 9/11 allocation of funds for the victims. They did the BP oil spill. They did the asbestos. So they're really providing intermediary services to try to get a settlement with the plaintiffs and the defendants. And she thought meeting this gentleman was going to help sway me. So when I met him and we had dinner, we actually were sitting at a bar at a great restaurant on the Upper East Side. Nicola is one of my favorites. And it's a really small bar, like 5 stools. And we're both sitting there. And I said, are you by chance Mike Roizen? And so we kind of hit it off at the bar before Maura showed up. And the biggest mistake was that Mike was actually so convincing that I got more negative after having dinner with him. And then we became friendly. And he started introducing me to plaintiff firms so I could talk to the plaintiffs directly that were involved in these cases. And that was the lucky break. And one plaintiff firm would introduce me to another plaintiff firm. And, so I was constantly getting their perspective on the class action suits. And they're like, we're never going to settle with these guys. We're going to take them through all the way to bankruptcy. We're going to, they've killed so many people. So having that perspective gave me more conviction to continue to be negative. And I actually had a lot of shit for it, excuse the language, from internally from Credit Suisse. In fact, I don't know if I wrote about this, but I think I did. I talked about how I got a call and interrupted me when I was visiting a client in Baltimore. I'm in a big conference room presenting the material and content of our housing information. And the secretary said, and Ivy, there's a call for you. And like, that doesn't happen unless it's like someone's dying or something. And it was the head of investment banking calling to tell me that I better change my tune as it related to Owens Corning because they're a client of the banks. And I was just like stunned that I was being told what I can and cannot say or how, and I didn't listen to him. And I think that, was a big decision. I was really concerned it might affect my career. I could even get fired. But I was so confident in what we had been doing. And in addition to people that we were speaking with, we were analyzing all the public companies that beyond my universe that had exposure. So I think that it was difficult when you have people that are, senior to you, or your people that you are certainly, working to please and are C-suite executives, and you're sitting here, obviously in complete opposition to their views, and staying the course was my really first most challenging lesson of sticking to my guns despite whatever opposition I had.
And then when Warren Buffett took that position, what was your mindset then?
I was scared. I was like, what does he know that I don't know? And oh my God, like, how can this happen? And he already had owned a lot of the debt. So for him, it was kind of like, I think, with all due respect to Warren Buffett and any, very powerful, successful investors, they tend to talk their books, right? They have positions, and, to me, they're biased. So him doubling down and buying a significant stake in the equities, taking a position, at first, I just called Mike and I was like, he's like, Ivy, you've done the work. He doesn't know shit. And just stick with what you've done, your analysis. That's all I'm going to tell you. And I was home on maternity leave with my oldest, and just watching the stock get crushed, and every salesperson was like, doubting me. And it was tough. I think, I don't know, even to this day, I mean, I have thick skin, but I remember that really had quite an impact on my level of confidence and really shook me up. But I stayed the course, and I continued to believe in the work that we did, and my colleagues, my associates. You know, when you have others, you're not on an island, and there are people that are on your team that you can call and vent to, and, you know, oh my God, and, you know, maybe one or two salespeople that really believe in what the work that you've done, and leaning on them to, like, you know, assure you, you know, stick with your gun, you know, stick to your guns, and that's what happened. So that was really, at this point, that was 2000, because I was on maternity leave, but it had been going on for years already. Really 98, 99, 2000, I'd say.
I guess that kind of like follows in to the next question I had, was the resiliency. Like, can you maybe go over the resilience you needed to stay bearish on the housing market around 05 to 07, when it sounded like, yet again, everyone else is very bullish. And I guess also, just sort of to one of your previous points, were there a lot of instances when upper level management would kind of pressure you to have a different opinion, kind of like what you just sort of explained?
Not as much from upper management. I think what I felt was more from my sales force. When institutional investors are, you know, bullish and long stocks, you know, the salespeople that are, you know, the masses of salespeople that you have as your distribution, many of them, no disrespect, there's great salespeople that I'll speak of some that they just want their clients, they kind of get swayed to their clients' views. So I think that there was a lot less support internally from my sales force for my ongoing bearishness and cautiousness. And it was frustrating, but really the senior leaders in the research department were more supportive of me, because I'd get into it with people and then I would look to them for support, and they always supported me. So Stefano Natella, the director of research, to his credit, and, you know, the other senior people in research, they were supportive of us. So it was really sales force and maybe sales traders, and just more internally, you know, the big platform that we had that doubted us. And that was hard. And there were nights that I doubted myself. And, you know, I think that what really grounded me was not only the data that was so, to us, flashing red in many instances, and the piece that we did in July of 2005 that was entitled Investors Gone Wild. And we did a lot of deep dive thematic pieces. That was a time that actually housing, people think that, you know, the recession, they think, you know, 07, 08 is when the economy bottomed, but housing started rolling over in 05. And we were seeing it in the inventory starting to rise. And we outlined with a lot of great data that just was too blatantly obvious that this is an investor driven market where people have no money and no skin in the game. On top of that, I would constantly call the network of private companies that I interacted with, the C-suite, and they'd be reinforcing that what my views and concerns were right dead on, and I should be concerned. So I constantly would look for outside reinforcement and testing my, you know, level of conviction. And I think the biggest danger for any analyst is to get complacent in their views. So I'm a paid warrior. That's how I think of myself. And I'm going to keep going until, you know, I feel like I've gotten everything I need. But I'm even after you question yourself. So in 05, the stocks got, like, July of 05 was the peak in the stocks, and they got totally shellacked. They were down from all of the second half of 05 through really fall of 06. And I was getting high fives, and, you know, people were like, you know, she's been right. And then Bob Toll and a few management teams, specifically Toll Brothers, indicated that they were seeing signs of a bottom and improvement in the fall of 06. And I was like, stocks are up in my face and they're rallying. They were calling it a Zelman bottom and making fun of me. And I got an email from the product manager that was so harsh and negative about the risk to my career for being a perma-bear, and how I should really think about it. He gave me examples of people like Citibank and people that were negative and they stayed negative too long and then they wound up losing their jobs. And I was pissed. And I sent it to my boss and I go, this is the internal support I get, you know? And so I think at that point I was pissed off and the stocks were up, and Dennis McGill, my partner, co-founder, we've been together since he was a summer intern when he graduated from Michigan. And he's now with me 22, 23 years. And we were like, we banged out this 10 minutes, like 10 reasons to sell home building stocks, and just downgraded the group and put sells across the board, and just was, you know what, we're doubling down, we're going for it. And this rally is a total, you know, false start. So it was fun. I mean, at that point we were like pissed and we were ready to, you know, show that the work that we've done, that we had a really high level of conviction and that rally would not be sustained. So you go from like questioning yourself to like feeling like, you know, every night when you go home, like everybody hates you and clients hate you, you know, you get hate mail. I actually got a threatening fax to cut off my fingers. Turns out it was a guy that his son is a broker. It was like an 80-year-old guy in Virginia that sent me a threatening fax, and we looked, because Credit Suisse looked into it, but there was a lot of people that were not that happy with me, and that's when they're long stocks. So you've got to be ready to deal with people that are going to be in disagreement with you and opposing you, and that's not always fun.
At the tail end of your book, you share a personal story of you going through the 13 years of cancer surgeries. I guess if you could just give us a glimpse into how you've changed from that experience. And I guess we're curious if you're playing golf now.
Actually, I just played golf for the first time in 14 years. I played 9 holes and I was actually at part a hole. I was pretty excited, and
Nice.
and I am slowly planning to get back into it. But I think, you know, I think having health issues really changes your priorities. And, you know, when the doctor tells you you have cancer, it's almost like this cloud comes over you and you can't hear anything. It's like you're barely hearing the doctor and you're just in your own little world. Or, you know, I think when you're having, in not my case, I had radiation, you're alone in this room for 7 weeks, 5 days a week, and you're in there and it's just you, and it's cold and it's just scary. And you're no matter how many people love you, you can't ever express what you're feeling. It's only you going through it. And I think that having my kids so young, when I first got diagnosed, I think to have their mother, who was constantly in the hospital and constantly having surgeries, I think it was really hard on them. So I think that more than anything, my illness and subsequent surgeries, the impact it had on them was what I was most concerned about. And I had such an amazing team, Dennis and Alan Ratner and Melinda, and people that have been there with me forever, that enabled me, where I wasn't having to be there every day, and you know, being able to focus on getting better. So it was kind of spread out, but it's you know, happy to be here. And it's not necessarily what, you know, anybody would have wanted to go through, but I think it's made me a more well-rounded individual in terms of priorities and focus on my family, and just being grateful. My sister-in-law, unfortunately, lost her to cancer, and to see the impact it's had on her 3 children, and just being so grateful, and, you know, having the ability to still be here and be with my family.
Glad to hear you're doing well.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
But yeah, I guess next we were just maybe going to do some forward-looking questions. I guess just how do you see the current sort of, you know, landscape of the real estate market now? Do you see any similarities between now and like 2008, or any major differences?
Definitely similarities and differences. So let's talk about the similarities. I think that right now, the sort of euphoric environment we had been in up until more recently, very similar in that euphoria. where home price would go up forever, and you couldn't go to a cocktail party or a barbecue and not hear someone talking about buying houses, flipping houses, and everybody's in the party. And I used to say I'm the only sober person at the party. I think there's similarities now in that up until this correction, which is becoming very significant right now, but we're going through in this inflection point with rates surging. We're seeing a dramatic shift in the market. Whereas during the great financial boom, and then ultimately the beginning of the correction, the internet and the transparency of information wasn't as intense as it is today, with the data providers and constant, flow of data that is now available to everyone. And people never thought home prices could go down. So they were complacent about risk. And I think that the party therefore kept going. Whereas right now, it's like those that are not in distress are running for the exit like a stampede in certain markets. And I think that it's the rate of change is so much more dramatic in the severity than the GFC, which was more sort of spread out and took longer, where this one is happening in Mach speed. And the difference that mitigates it from being the crisis that the world experienced is there's tremendous equity, skin in the game. Now there's many homeowners today, first-time buyers that bought homes with leverage and only put 3.5% down. And there's likely to be, we think, home prices will correct more than that. So we're forecasting home prices to decline nationally in 2004 and 2023 and 2024, 4 or 5% in the existing market, 4 and 3% in the new home market. But in certain markets, that could be 15% corrections in markets that are, interesting, that the hottest markets are the more likely ones that will see the bigger rate of change, which is to the downside, which is what happened in the last cycle. So it's the sand states, the smile states. It's where all the investors go. No one's buying in Cleveland, which is actually not true. I mean, looking at, there are people speculating and, individuals that might have 15 homes in a portfolio that now they're saying, costs are up, property taxes are up, insurance is up, my cost of capital is up. Maybe I just want 2 now. So, listing the other, 13. And that's what you're seeing more today, is that they've made a lot of money. So it's not likely for those that bought, let's say right around when COVID kind of hit the market and we shut down, we've seen $5 trillion of equity appreciation. And a lot of that's embedded in people's home values. We're not likely to see foreclosures in the magnitude that really is what pounded the market. But inventories are rising, like Phoenix, anecdotally, in the last 15 weeks, inventories on MLS are up over 200%. And they're literally still below historic norms in absolute numbers, but every week 1,000 new listings are coming. And it's going to take another few weeks where it's going to be at normal levels. And there are pockets within the greater Phoenix market, like in Buckeye or Maricopa, where you're already seeing a buyer's market come to fruition. And the same thing's happening with rental. Rental listings are rising, and you're seeing pressure on, the landlords that are seeing more negotiation. But there's just a tremendous amount of supply. The supply and backlog for new construction, both in single family and multifamily, are at very significant levels. Multifamily is at the highest it's been since the early 70s. And for single family, it's the highest level since 2006. And in single family, about 1/3 plus of the backlog is speculative. And so those that are built to order, they go and sign a contract. They know that it's going to take, 8 to 12 months because cycle times are extended. Those that just bought 6 months ago are canceling. The investors that bought 6 months ago are canceling. So we're seeing cancellation rates historically have been between 15 to 20%. And they got as low as like 5%. There was just no cans in the market, really starting with call it May of 20 was when the market surprisingly took off with 16 million people unemployed, and we're in the midst of COVID. So that was somewhat shocking. But now the market is seeing cans rising, and our data aggregator, our survey showed that nationally, CAN rates, we just published our home building survey today, was at 17%, up from like 12%. But like we were on the phone doing a Zoom call with a Phoenix builder who said his CANs are now at 45%. And so I'll talk to builders in certain markets that are actually saying the market's pretty resilient. We still have buyers, we can't raise prices, but the market velocity is still pretty healthy. And then you have other builders that are, indicating, or brokers or mortgage lenders, that, demand is just plummeted, and we're really seeing supply rising at the same time. And it's a pretty, frightening thing to be watching, and what's going to change direction of demand and supply. Supply is coming, but as demand is slowing, you're going to see prices under pressure. It's just that simple, and somewhat contingent on, of course, mortgage rates. Now, one of the biggest risks is that today, the Fed, who is late behind the curve in their transitory view of inflation, now are forced to fight inflation and look at the playbook from Paul Volcker of what, he had to do coming in, and basically whatever they had to tighten to slow down inflation. If we continue to see the economy slowing and rates, let's say, do come back in a little bit, there's a lot of people that think the economy is slowing, and the 10-year yield, which is, rallied a bit as there's a flight to safety, people want to buy US Treasury bonds, then rates will come back down and housing will go back to the races and everything will be okay, because rates are going to come down because of the slowing economy. But I think the bloom is off the rose, and I think you'd have to have a substantial decline in mortgage rates, because the backlash from the refi boom that ensued from the plummeting rates that we found as a result of COVID, mortgage rates went from, call it 2019, 4% down to 2.65, I think is the trough. And what happened during that period is that what the Fed wanted, people could refi, they can improve their monthly, outlays through, refi into a lower mortgage rate, and helping consumers with, just overall easier access on the cost of capital. Now, over 90% of consumers that own a home and have a mortgage are locked in below 5. And those that are locked in, about 50% are locked in below 3.5. So that just creates a more of a disincentive for people to sell and stay put if you're locked in at that rate, because they're not transferable. And so I think the market's going to have a real tough time from a demand perspective. And then the question is, well, people will say, well, Ivy, if people can't move or won't move, doesn't that mean there'll be less supply? And I said, yeah, but we believe that a big part of the surge in demand came from non-primary buyers, which included second homeowners and investors, both private and institutional, and sort of the intermediary buyers that act as what is termed as instant buyers, where they buy a house and then they put some lipstick on and fix it up, and then they try to sell it for you. And they're doing that to provide consumers easy access. They're the ones that are running for the exits right now that we're seeing and hearing about. So I think that it's going to be, interesting how much, what the magnitude of price pressure is going to be. But long-winded answer, which I feel like I'm doing a lot of those, the magnitude of it, we think we're on the conservative side right now, nationally. But we think it's more likely to be, again, concentrated with the risk where the supply coming in backlog is the greatest. And coincidentally, they're all, the developers tend to go to the same markets. So that's where you're, seeing those markets greater at risk. The Texas markets, the, Arizona, Vegas, Nevada, you've got the mountain states like Boise and Montana, and, markets that don't necessarily matter from a national perspective that much, because they're not as significant as, let's say, Georgia, Texas, Florida, in terms of permits, California, but on the margin are the ones seeing the greatest rate of change right now.
Okay, Ivy. So I'm a little embarrassed to ask this, but and I'll preface this with, my wife is Austrian, and her friends always complain about the building materials in the US and the lack of concrete in single family homes. Can you give some guidance on the building materials here? And is there going to be any change going forward, or just why do we build so much with wood?
Well, I think, it probably is a function of where you live. And like Florida, there's a lot of concrete building. And, depending on the market, it tends to be a faster cycle times, but we are seeing some innovative approaches. Like there's a company out of Austin that does 3D printed homes, and all are in concrete. So, I think that the more challenged builders have been to obtain the building materials, the sticks and bricks, the lumber, and the inflation, it's forced them to look at alternative building materials, although lumber is kind of crashing now. So that's a nice tailwind to them. But I think it's just the way they've always done it. Builders are like dinosaurs, it's difficult to innovate because they're really just more of a coordinator of putting a puzzle together. And the traditions of utilizing, stick frame homes in certain markets, that's what the consumer, desires. And so I think it's about consumer preference that's driven it, but the quality of like European homes, and having spent some time having lived overseas, it's hard to disagree with your wife and her friends, but whether we see a bigger influx of product offering from builders, it's really about cost and what the overall returns for them will look like. Will really drive what the product offering will be.
You hear her yell "pop mache" a real lot when she's talking about the homes here. Did you say, so there's a company that's doing 3D printing homes?
3D printed homes, correct.
So then do they just put them together kind of like Legos? How does that sort of work?
Well, I would say there's, I don't know how many days it takes, but it's basically all done with machinery. And once the home is, the concrete's been poured and the printer is done, I think then it goes into sort of the more traditional, trades come and finish it off and do the flooring. But in terms of how it's done robotically, it's all robotics. And so you'd have to watch a video. I can get you the link. I'm having a senior moment because I can't think of the name of the company, but they're not the only ones out there that are doing it, but it's negligible as a percent of the market. Just like, these affordable PUs or affordable housing units, these pods that people can, basically put in their backyard in areas that are, affordability is just out of reach. And those are more of a trend today. Tiny houses, I think it's APUs or affordable something units. I can't think of the
additional dwelling units, ADUs.
ADUs. I think it's ADUs. Thank you. So I think that is more of a trend, and just creating more shelter, because the perception again is that there's not enough shelter. There is a shortage of shelter. It's just that it's a shortage of shelter that's affordable. If you look at what's being developed, it's not affordable product. It's product that is arguably, expensive today for the average household. That's, call it 75,000 in, household income. They can't afford to pay, 2,500 a month easily with inflation across everything that's, non-discretionary, utilities, property taxes, healthcare, food and energy. And it's really, really tough for today's both renters and prospective buyers that are looking today. So we need more affordable housing units. We just are not seeing them develop because they can't get the returns. And of course, it's like, the NEMA, like, they want to say, oh, we all want to build it. We all want affordable housing. But when it comes to their local municipality and it's time to vote, will we approve this project where we have a senior living, community that might be offering very affordable, and they don't want it in their backyard? No. So, the local homeowners that are voting, they're voting against it. And their legislators, are all they want is their constituents to vote for them. So they support what their voters want. And no one wants it in their backyard.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think I misheard this, but you still live in Cleveland, correct?
I actually am in Cleveland and New York. So I kind of have now, I'm an empty nester now. So
Okay.
I am on the road between, my youngest is actually boarding in Cleveland, a rising senior. And Zia, they're all Z's, Zoe, Zachary, and Zia. All our dogs were Z's. But Zia just left for a trip to Europe, a teen tour, and she's going to Greece. And we spent a few days in New York together. And then I drove her out to the airport and just shipped her off. So, she's still 17, but back and forth, she's right now home from school. So spend more time, and she plays soccer. So in Cleveland, I'll be there throughout, her soccer season, and try to be there. The other two are off to their respective colleges. So that doesn't matter where I am now, Alex. I get to go anywhere.
There you go. I was just going to say, we grew up in Michigan, but Jack, being unsatisfied with how bad the Detroit Lions were, decided to become a Cleveland Browns fan. So every year for probably, I don't know how many years we go. Probably
really? And people are still friends with you in Michigan? And you're a Browns fan?
Barely.
Yeah.
That's why I had to move to North Carolina.
So every year for probably close to, I don't know, almost probably a decade, we went to Cleveland to see a Cleveland Browns game. So I very.
Good, Jack. That's awesome. Well, every year the Clevelanders are just hoping this is the year. We're gonna, unfortunately, we didn't get what we hoped for with Baker. So there's always hope.
Yeah, Baker will be joining me in Charlotte, I heard. So, so Ivy, so we are a books podcast. I know you mentioned Liar's Poker. Are there any other books that you'd really recommend, or podcasts, or just people that you follow that would be beneficial to the listeners?
I think there's a ton of people that I really enjoy. I was just chatting with a friend about a book called Psychology of Money, and by Morgan Housel. And he actually writes a blog, and I think he's phenomenal. And Masters in Business with Barry Ritholtz is a weekly podcast that has usually really high quality guests. And it's usually people that published a book, and they'll talk about the book, and then they'll talk about their careers and their lives. And I find that is one that I am constantly listening to. I'm actually joining a podcast tomorrow by a gentleman, George Noble, who was at Fidelity and really well, not only well regarded and well known for his successful performance, but he has a podcast called No Bull. And it's just a really open format that he brings in guests, and there's like several people his cronies are on, they're all asking questions. And I find it to be really entertaining, but interesting. So he actually invited me to join him. So I'm going to do that tomorrow live on Twitter. So I'm a fan and I get to be a part of it. So it's pretty cool. Just so many books. I read a book that was life-changing for me. It's been a while, but it was called Thrive by Arianna Huffington. And I think that it was really a wake-up call to find more balance in my life. And some of the things that I read in that book, I really utilized and made changes in how I interact with my employees. Like, don't email them on the weekends, and make sure that you offer them things like yoga and just more considerate. But it was really, really more like a self-help book, I'd say. But I really feel like it was a life changer for me. I'm sure I can keep going. I'm a big fan of just podcasts in general, but I find myself now, as went through the parent stage where I read all these books about. I'm not a big fan of social media because I have 3 children, 2 girls. So I went through the stage of reading books like Girls on the Edge, which was a great book by Leonard Sachs. And then I get into the sort of more business-oriented books. But, for this listener, I don't know if they want self-help, they want parent books, they want business books. But anyway, those are a few just to highlight.
Cool.
I'm reading a book by Quincy Jones right now called, or actually not authored by Quincy Jones, but it's a book called 12 Notes. And that everyone has 12 notes, and it's how they basically their lives evolve is how they compose those 12 notes. And everyone has the same 12 notes, but they just differently, compose how they utilize those 12 notes. And I'm kind of in that one right now, enjoying it.
Well, Ivy, is there a good place? I think we're probably just about wrapping up. Is there a good place where people can reach out to you, or where can people find more about you if they would want to?
Our website, Zelman Associates, and ZelmanAssociates.com. But, out for me personally, if they're interested, the book is available on Amazon. There's also audiobooks. And today, as I think about my career, I recently sold a majority stake of my company. And, I'd really like to do more as it relates to paying it forward. It's one of my passions. And I did a lot of work with young adults in high schools and colleges. I still do. I speak with students. So, if there's people that are interested in also women's events, I don't think it's limited to women, but I think there's a lot of need for financial literacy and understanding. There's a lot of people that are really intimidated by the stock market. And there's been, tremendous amount of financial literacy offered out there, but there's things that I find myself leaning to do more of that as I interact with women that don't know the first thing about how to manage their money, or let their husbands do it for them, and they're clueless. But there are also professional, men that are not, they're doctors or lawyers, and they're just not as, familiar with, even though they're successful, the stock market, and you turn your money over to someone and you let them, invest it for you. And it's like, you should have a little bit of knowledge about what's going on, which is why Psychology of Money is probably one of the best ones for every listener to read, by Morgan Housel. I think it'll be helpful for everyone. So, but yeah, you can find the book on Amazon and our website and my LinkedIn, my personal LinkedIn. And I guess that's it. Cause I'm not, like I said, I'm not on Instagram. I haven't gone to Twitter, and maybe because I just feel like the dopamines, and there's just already enough intensity in my life. So I have refrained at this point to doing that. And anyway, I don't know that that's the message that many people like, but that's me. I am what I am, like Popeye the Sailor Man.
Well, Ivy, thanks so much. And with that, please reach out to us at brothersonbooks@gmail.com for any book recommendations, or if you'd like to be a guest host for a particular book you have in mind. A great review or rating on whichever platform you're listening to this would be greatly appreciated. And lastly, if you can think of any friend, family member, or coworker that might like this episode, please pass it along.
I have one book for you before you let me go, Jack.
Sure.
I just remembered, it's called The Choice by Edith Eger. And
Okay.
she was on a Brene Brown podcast. And Brene Brown is a phenomenal psychologist, and Rising Strong is a book she wrote that I think is phenomenal and really was helpful in many aspects, more of a self-help book. But Brene interviewed Edie, 95-year-old Holocaust survivor, who talks about making choices in life and not being a victim. And while it's a tough read, because she goes through her experiences of being at Auschwitz, I think it was just so impactful and humbling. And whatever you think you're going through, just read her book and her attitude, and you will just straighten up and just be so grateful to be not having been through what Edie's been through. She's still going strong, 95 years old. And also one more book that is being launched in September, and it's by a good friend, Dr. Michael Roizen, with his colleagues that have contributed, Albert Ratner and Peter Linneman. Little advertisement, but this book is called The Great Age Reboot. And this is a book that is suggesting that we as a nation we need to focus on our wellness and the medical advances that we are going to see. My children are going to live to 130, and talking about life longevity. And it was the most bullish thing I've read. I read it last July in a published version. And I'm just so excited for Michael and his colleagues to launch the book in September by National Geographic or publisher, and just put it on your list, because we all need something positive to read. And while it might seem pie in the sky, a lot of the things make sense. So that would be definitely top of the list, because yet it's not available till September. So stay tuned.
Awesome.
On Amazon.
Thanks so much, Ivy.
All right, guys, have a great day. Thank you.
Take care.